the first $100,000 is hard, but you have to do it. You have to build a portfolio of $100,000, which, saying that's hard is an understatement to busy parents and people trying to earn money and pay bills and all the rest of it. He's got a point on this. And what he's saying is that once you reach $100,000 in assets, you reach a point where compound interest really starts to work in your favor.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Mouthy Money Podcast. I am the host Edmund Greaves, and I'm joined as ever by my very good co-host Chris Chu, who is Head of Consumer Finance at communications consultancy MRM. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Ed. How's it going?
Yes, very well, thank you. It's wintry but sunny, as you can tell from those of you watching on video from my get-up today.
You've been hiking up a mountain again, Ed?
Well, I was in the woods with my dog, is my excuse, and it was frosty. It's frosty where we are, so here we are. Yeah. Anyway, enough about the weather. We've got a really interesting topic today, and today the floor is going to be Chris's.
At last, I might add.
At last. And I am just here. I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn and understand.
God.
So what are we talking about today? We're talking about something, as you might have guessed from what is the headline of this video or podcast, if you're listening, something called the tipping point. Now, this is a bit of it's slightly vague when you say just the tipping point, but actually what we're talking about here is quite an online mimetic investment concept that's kind of popularized on places like YouTube and that kind of thing. Is that right, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so it's something I've seen a lot of actually online, the conversation around this. And so I dive deep into it because I'm not only a producer of finance content online with you, Ed, but I also consume it a lot and saw this conversation happening and then got drawn in. And it's actually very interesting.
So the tipping point. So what we're talking about here, and this is specifically to do with building long-term wealth, and in doing that through the method of kind of investing, saving and investing for the long term. Just break it down for us. What is the tipping point, and how does it work? Is there a kind of, they're guessing there's kind of maths behind it and that kind of thing?
Which is never my strong suit, Ed, so apologies to all the mathematicians listening. But I suppose it's a rule of thumb. It's a good rule of thumb that has slightly changed the way that I think about my investing and my goals in a positive way. So all good investment tips start with the company Berkshire Hathaway, for those of you who follow these sort of things online. So that's the famous company. Warren Buffett was head of he had a colleague called Charlie Munger, less celebrated, but equally as talented on the investing side of things. And he is quoted as saying words to the effect of, and I won't say the actual words because there is some profanity in there, but the first $100,000 is hard, but you have to do it. You have to build a portfolio of $100,000, which, saying that's hard is an understatement to busy parents and people trying to earn money and pay bills and all the rest of it. But he's got a point on this. And what he's saying is that once you reach $100,000 in assets, you reach a point where compound interest really starts to work in your favor. So I think Einstein's quoted as saying compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And it's essentially interest on your interest. That's the principle that's at play with this idea of tipping point. So it's where there's also this sort of online conversation about passive income, isn't there? And how can you earn a passive income and make sure that your sort of investments are working hard enough to earn you some money? This tipping point is where that starts to become a reality. Essentially where your contributions start to be dwarfed by, or not dwarfed, probably too strong on it, but overtaken by the earnings that you make on your portfolio. So to give you an example of how compound interest works, just to give you a principle to work from everybody who's listening. So imagine you have £100 in a savings account. It's getting 10% interest a year, which, would be great if that were the case. But anyway, run with it. So in year one, you earn £10 interest on your £100, which gives you £110. Year two, you earn another 10%, but you don't earn it on the £100, you earn it on the £110, which means you get £11 returns, which means end of year two, you have 121. Year three, you earn another 10% on that 121, which gives you £12.10, which gives you £133.10. And it continues and continues in that vein until at some point, the amount of interest you earn on the principal is bigger than the contributions that you're making. And that so go on.
I mean, basically, you're at the point there then that the money that you have already made on your initial saving or investment, whatever you want to call it, is actually the thing that is now driving your pot, upwards. Basically, it's like a virtuous circle of of positive returns, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially, if you continue to invest, generate a certain amount of returns, or able to on that principal amount of money, then it will continue to earn more and more and more. And the hackneyed old example given is like a snowball running downhill. It picks up more and more money as it goes, and all of a sudden it meets a critical mass where it's starting to earn money for itself. And that, I don't know about you, Ed, but that sounded really appealing to me as an idea. The idea that something else is working as hard as I am towards my family's future. And it's compound interest.
Look. I'm going to be the journalist here, and I'm going to come with questions and reservations here that I'm now. So I think in the theory of it's really, really good and really interesting. And you're laying out what are essentially mathematical rules here, that the more you contribute and the more it grows, the more it will, snowball in a positive way. I mean, you do see that in the opposite way with things like debt as well. Debt can kind of snowball, and when those have kind of interest rates that keep pushing that debt higher, you get the opposite effect. It's just a mathematical concept here that we're effectively dealing with. I wouldn't call it reservation, but I think the caveat that I'd like to kind of think about a little bit at this juncture is, you mentioned your example there, 10%. Is that ambitious? Is that, should we be a little bit more realistic here? Do we also need to think about things like inflation, that it's, eating away at the bottom underneath kind of thing? What do you think about that?
Well, as always in life, these things are more complicated, and you're hitting on some of the key principles that slightly undermine this way of thinking, which is, yeah. So if I can return to this 100,000 number, I now treat my entire family's portfolio as one, essentially. So we all have different types of vehicles. So I've got workplace pension, I've got my SIP, my wife Tanya has the same. We've got a junior ISA for each of my daughters. We've got some cash savings sitting in a cash account that we want easy access to. Stocks and shares ISA with some stuff being earned there. A little bit of Bitcoin, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so if you add all that together, we're over that 100,000 point. So I was thinking, right, okay, great. Well, then we should be earning this passive income then. If not, why not? I just have to turn a few knobs on my thing and invest in a few different things, and we'll get there. And actually, all the things you mentioned come into play, Ed. So, the returns on each component is obviously different depending on what you're invested in, and there are lots of good reasons why. I'm in cash to a certain degree in order to have a buffer because of uncertainty out there and 2 young kids and all the rest of it. And I've got a longer term time horizon on my pensions than I have on my cash, stocks and shares ISA. And then the other thing you need to think about is inflation, which, as we know, has been running rampant for the last few years, which means that these things kind of affect returns, and real returns are probably lower than what you think they could be. And then there's lifestyle and bills and cost of living crisis and changes in our circumstances and the desire to go on holiday and to spend money on home improvements and all those other kind of things. And I was thinking about what Charlie Munger said about that first 100K, and also another sort of, I don't know if it's apocryphal or real, but Warren Buffett apparently told his wife that he wasn't going to buy a house when they first started, when they were first married, because he thought it would be a drain on his ability to earn money in the stock markets, and that they'd get to that eventually, which is a very kind of strong, brave, contrarian view, but not one that I was willing to look at because I was desperate to get on the housing ladder for what I perceived to be the security of that. So, I've made investments in other areas too, in terms of my house. I know you don't see your house as an investment, Ed. We talked about that previously, but, I was wondering why it's taken me so long to get to this point. Essentially, I've been working for, 23 years. And then you have to think about, well, I wasn't really taking investing that seriously, maybe until about 10 years ago, and et cetera, et cetera. But we are where we are. So there's all these kind of different variables that suddenly make that 100,000 figure seem incredibly vague and not relevant. So I sought recently to sit down and work out with all of those various drags what my tipping point figure might actually be. Again, to go back to it, where the contributions that I make every year would be outstripped in theory by the returns. And as you can imagine, it depends on the amount of annualized return that you're able to generate across that entire portfolio, right? So I looked at whether it would be 6%, 7%, 8%, 9%, 10%. What would that number be? And then realistically, what I could look towards. And it was a really interesting process. And I came out on the fact that if I can get to 7.6% return across all of my investments, then I am able to reach my tipping point my tipping point is £169,000 on that entire portfolio in theory, and then it will all start to work from there. And so at the moment, I'm about £15,000 short of that. So in time frame terms, maybe 18 months away from getting to that position. But what it's done is it's given me a different lens to look at this process through. I found it quite energizing and quite encouraging. It's given me something to aim towards, which helps, I think. And it's brought another factor into play when I'm making a decision about what to do with our money in terms of that cash pile that I was talking about, which is I would quite like that to generate extra returns. Thank you very much. So that process has caused me to sit down, look at what I'm trying to achieve across all of it, and made me think about it. Now, it's not without its flaws, as you pointed out, but I think that's a good thing. It's made me more familiar and aware of what we're doing. I think one of the major stumbling blocks I hit upon was when I tried to, I use Hargreaves Lansdown as a platform for much of those things. When I tried to work out what my return was year on year, it was unable to tell me. They were unable to tell me. I phoned them and said, am I using your platform wrong? But no, they were unable to tell me. So I now have to sort of create my own charts and my own Excel spreadsheets and all the rest of it to try and keep an eye on this and see if I actually do get to that point. So I'm still at the point now where I'm thinking about what to do with our assets, whether or not, I want to go all in on this sort of stuff, how much, because I'm naturally quite cautious, how much of this am I willing to commit to? But it is an interesting thought process for me to go through and gives me something else to sort of think towards. And I think it's useful for that from that standpoint.
So a couple of, more practical questions than anything else, I think, at this point, particularly if anybody's kind of listening and thinking, okay, well, I'd like to try this myself. The first one is, does it matter that you have different pots in different places? It doesn't have to be all in one place, singing or, doing one thing to reach that kind of tipping point, or does that matter?
No, I don't think so. So for my understanding, obviously what you need to be mindful of is charges or the returns on each component of it. But if, and depending on how much you've got in it, the returns. So, most of my money is in my pension. So that needs to be doing a lot of heavy lifting, and that is outperforming the cash element of the portfolio. But there is an element of calculating what that is across the entire portfolio and coming out at a sort of average number and sort of, as I say, tweaking the practical concerns of day-to-day living and month-to-month living and year-to-year living alongside this idea of, well, do I actually need that much in cash, or can I put more of that to work on this idea of heading towards my tipping point? Or do I need to start contributing more to my pension because, you get tax breaks, and because that means that total will go up higher? And also, there is this thing around when you need to access the money, and all of these variables need to be taken into account. And as we always say on this show, this is not financial advice. This is just a discussion for entertainment purposes. I am not a financial advisor. I'm sure there are holes in what I'm saying, but I think what I found was it was a galvanizing idea for me to kind of dive deep into this stuff and really think about what all of this is doing. What the charges are is the other thing as well. What am I invested in? What are the overall effect of the charges are on all of these things, and how is that going to affect what that is? And then this idea of reaching a psychological threshold. I quite like to, once we're past that, I can think, right, okay, this portfolio is working as hard as I am, which is
so my next question, again, a practical one, is obviously you've done all these calculations yourself. You said Hargreaves Lansdown basically weren't very helpful in doing, some of the numbers that you needed. So what tools did you use, and how did you go about kind of getting an accurate figure, and, that people could use themselves if they want to figure out their own tipping point?
Well, and I caveat this heavily because, I wasn't willing to pay for financial advice on this one, and it's a rule of thumb for me. So, I'm quite happy with the general direction of everything we're doing. So I was quite happy to use AI to have a look at, speculate into the future what this would look like, and to run those numbers for me. So what I did was an Excel sheet of where the portfolios all stood at a point in time. Helped AI to tried to use AI to help me to work out what the annualized return was on each different component, and then put that all in an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm still collecting data on this, Ed. So I know what the tipping point is, but actually where I'm at with this is still trying to work out because it's only a recent process, it's still trying to work out what the returns are on my investment elements of it, because as I mentioned before, that sort of information isn't available. So I've now put a figure down, which works from a particular date, and we'll keep an eye on that. And this will form a part of my financial planning every year, where I'm like, have we reached that point yet? So it's been a slow process, but I do know that based on those projections, that as it stands, my current tipping point is I say, around sort of £169,000, and we're not a million miles off that, which just kind of galvanised this savings effort even further.
So that brings me to my next question, and the practical thing is once you hit that tipping point, so say you hit 169,000, what do you do at that point? Do you just keep doing what you're doing, or do you pack in the contributions because the interest itself is just growing the pot?
Well, again, this is part of a different frame of planning, where I also looked at my pension, and the difference is stark in terms of that compound interest growth if I stop contributing into that. So my intention is to keep going. And obviously there'll be vagaries in terms of what happens with life and, changing cost of living and different demands on money. But actually, the idea is to keep going. It's not that I stop then immediately, although in theory, I suppose I could at this point and it would match what I'm doing at the moment. But no, the whole point is to keep adding to that base pile so that that snowball gets bigger, that compounding effect gets bigger, and therefore the returns, the 10% return example that we used before, if that's on 300 grand as opposed to 150, then that's going to be far bigger and far more impactful. So my intention is to keep contributing right the way up until my retirement, or right the way up until my girls' JISAs mature, or right the way up until a time comes on I need to access that money in my stocks and shares ISA, for example. So no, I think continuing to contribute was never something that I considered stopping. But again, it's just like, it can feel, talking about the emotion of this, Ed, it can feel a little bit demoralizing. You're putting money in and you're seeing, I check my portfolio. We talked about this before far too often, really, especially since I started doing this. And, it ticks up and then it ticks down, it ticks up. There are little sort of psychological barriers that I've hit with my own SIP, for example, where I'm just like, it was above this number 6 months ago. Now it's below it. And actually, if you zoom out, you'll see that it's been a steady climb upwards with some, ups and downs along the way. But actually, it can make it a little bit demoralizing, where you feel like sometimes you're putting money into a bit of a bottomless pit that you're never going to see again. It's particularly when there are demands and challenges on all of us at this time with cost of living and everything else. But, kept the faith, keep contributing. And I suppose this feels like a nice, more accessible point to aim for, where I'll actually have that be through a sort of psychological threshold where it's like, it's not just, and it hasn't just been me, by the way, these returns obviously have been keep continuing, but actually now my money is working as hard, if not harder than me, to generate the returns if I just carry on at this pace, which just makes you feel like you are actually winning this battle to try and grow this portfolio. And I'm no Warren Buffett, I'm no Charlie Munger, as anyone listening to this will know, but like you say, there is a kind of mathematical rule at the heart of this, which can't be argued with. The question is, how do you get to the purity of that by cutting out all the noise and making sure that you're doing all you can to make the numbers stack up so this engine can carry my money forward into the future? So it may or may not happen. Anything can happen between now and then. I'm aware of that, but it's quite nice. You have to think about what something in the future would look. You have to have a plan, right? As we say, you have to have something to aim towards, and it needs to be flexible. It needs to be adaptable, but also it needs to keeps you disciplined, right? And this is another way to keep you disciplined in the short to medium term.
I think it's a useful kind of like almost like a psychological game to play with your own kind of portfolio. It's tricky though. I mean, if I look at my own situation now, kind of, you've given me a little bit of better understanding of what this tipping point thing is. It's much harder for me to be able to do that with my family. The main reason that being, and I know we've spoken about this before, is Ellen is a nurse in the NHS. She has an NHS pension. And the way you calculate NHS pensions, I mean, frankly, is Byzantine. Like there is no number. It's what's called a career. So she's on the post 2015, and you get what's called like a career average figure, basically. And there's literally, she goes on the NHS pension app or whatever it is, and it just tells her a number. Like, this is what your income would be if you retired today, sort of thing. It's like, oh, okay. there is no way of me working out a tipping point with her because we don't have a pension that has a value number on it. There's some sort of weird future projection, basically. So if I were to do this, I'd have to do something, I don't know, completely different, I guess, a different way of coming at it. So I guess what I'm saying here is that it's not something that necessarily would work for everybody. I do think it's interesting. I do think I should go away and calculate it. My kind of reservation with it, where although I do think, it is a really good way of highlighting that kind of the importance of that, mathematical change that, puts rocket boosters under a portfolio effectively, is that, the lack of, you can't guarantee that return, right?
No.
If you have to hit that number. And the thing that scares me about it is if you calculate this yourself and you have to hit that number, say 8% every year, and you don't, it can create a situation where people start making rash decisions to try and hit that number.
Yeah,
and
completely.
that can cause chaos.
No, completely.
So
agree.
I would, I would offer a note of caution on that kind of thing. Look, in practice, global markets have a tendency to go up. And this kind of thing, we have ups and downs. You can't guarantee that number. So maybe should it be in a range if you're thinking about it more than like a fixation on a specific number? I think that's an important thing to have in mind.
I think that's a really good point, Ed. And I suppose I'm at pains to point out in this that it's just another psychological lens to look at my money. I did think about that. And if you look at, if I give you the example of the difference between the returns. So an annual, I thought I settled on 7.6% as feasible, right? I'm not going to beat myself if I don't make it. If I then looked at what it was at returns of 7%, it was 184,000. 6%, 215, 5%, 258, returns of 4%, 323. So we're looking at, I'd need to double my money in order to reach that with those smaller returns. So you're right. There is an incentive there to think, right, well, okay, then I do need to make sure that I'm hitting those numbers at the higher end of that scale if I want this to work. But, and this is where my sort of natural caution kicks in and where I'm using it as part, it's almost like a motivation thing, because I don't know, sometimes, and maybe this is a, and again, I'm getting more into the psychological aspects of this, but maybe this is just a symptom of the set and forget thing, where I've actually set, but I've not forget. I haven't forgotten. It's like I check it all the time. And it feels like sometimes I'm throwing money into the Marie Celeste a little bit with some of my portfolios. It's just like, this thing's going to just drift on until through the mist, until I hit this fictional date called retirement, and then have a look inside the treasure chest and go, oh, my hearties, look what I found here. This is what I've got to live on. Whereas this gave me a bit more of a sense of, it was galvanizing. It gave me a bit more of a sense of, okay, actually those numbers are really important. Those percentage differences do make a difference. So if and when I'm coming to make a decision about something in my portfolio, it'll be a factor that I consider, as well as the long-term financial security of my family, as well as, how my risk appetite, all those kind of things, my level of knowledge and comfort with what the investment vehicle might be. It's just whether or not I can dial up or dial down certain aspects of my money. And I suppose the big thing is, because of the uncertainty out there, probably and we talked about this on last week's pod, too much of my money is sat in cash earning just above inflation. And you're thinking, could you be a bit brave? Could I be a bit braver with that? Could I? And I don't think that is a bad question to ask. So I'm not saying I'm going to go and take all of that, Ed, and put it on red and cross my fingers. I think it's more like, well, actually, maybe there's more that I can do with this to try and edge that point closer. And then, it feels like I'll have passed the threshold, which feels meaningful. And it's taken a long time to get there. And all of a sudden, instead of sort of sailing on through the mist to this vague direction, it feels like I'm, at the tiller pointing it in a certain direction. So I think there's, as well as the sort of practical mathematics of this, as always with me, because I'm quite an emotional fella, is the emotional aspect to it, the sense of having control of some of the controllables that you can, or at least having a sense of what the direction of travel looks like. So all of that factors into this, and I think that's why that appeals.
I think that's so important to how you overcome that sense of futility. And I think especially for younger people who have smaller pension pots and maybe, been working for a few years and got a few £1,000 in a pot, whatever, and they're kind of sitting looking at it and think, well, what's the point? I can't get on the housing ladder. It's not making any difference, blah, blah, blah. It's just, what's the point? Well, actually, the point is that that pot, if you look after it, and you know, like a good gardener, you know, trim it every year and make sure that everything's, you know, ship shape on an ongoing basis. Over time, that kind of, you know, acorn will grow into a mighty oak sort of thing. And it's just understanding that actually, it does take time. You do have to spend time curating it and making sure that it's moving in the right direction and growing in the right way. You know, there is no quick way out of it. The tipping point is obviously going to put, you know, it's going to mathematically put some boosters under what you're doing already, but you just have to build. Like, the thing is to build, and giving yourself and we've talked about this before, you know, it's great to have a 25-year goal, but have a 3-year goal as well. You know, say to yourself, you know, oh, I've got 10 grand in there. Okay, let's get to 30 in 3 years time, sort of thing. And go from there and build on that when you've built that, and just ensure that it's moving in the right direction. And yeah, there's always going to be setbacks, but you know, keep moving forward and keep that positive mindset, and you know, it'll come right. The reason we do it fundamentally is this is not about, you know, becoming, you know, rich as tyrant, kind of sitting on your pile of gold, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. Literally, it is ultimately because we have a thing called inflation that is destroying the value of our money slowly over time. And you have to stay ahead of that. So you have to build a pot of money that beats inflation. That is the very basic, you know, if you're beating inflation, that is the most basic thing you can do, and save money over time. And if you can then build on that and the interest on your interest, you know, getting earned, great. So I think, you know, it is really useful from that perspective. I think I'd be keen to hear from anybody who's interested in doing their own calculations and kind of what numbers they came out. So I think please do leave us a comment if this is something that you've kind of thought about, you've done yourself. Maybe you think it's the wrong way of going about it.
Yeah, feel free to tell me, listeners, because I'm putting a bit of store by it. So if you if you want to point out my flaws, then do.
So I think I think that kind of wraps it up. I think a really interesting little concept to play with there. As ever, do give us a like and subscribe if you've made it this far. We do appreciate it. It's very helpful for the channel as we grow day by day. Acorns to oak trees.
Yeah, same principles, right, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Chris, for sharing your tipping point with us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for listening in. With that, we shall see you very soon. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for tuning into the Mouthy Money podcast. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on all our content. Follow us for more on your preferred podcasting channel, including Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Stay in touch by following our social channels on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe to the Mouthy Money newsletter on mouthymoney.co.uk. The Mouthy Money podcast is produced for general informational purposes only. It should not be construed as investment, legal, tax, or other forms of financial advice. If in any doubt about the themes expressed, consider consulting with a regulated financial professional for your own personal situation. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments can go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you started with. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. For more information, visit fca.org.uk/investsmart for more. Thank you.